Thank you, Andile. So now I'm between you and lunch. Uh, I'm going to do my best not to keep you hungry. I have to just figure out the technology. Good afternoon. My name is Michele Fourie. I work at the Figure Supervision Department in the FSCA. I was there when it was still FSB, so been there for a while. I cringed when Heidi asked me to do a presentation on CDD required for digitalisation of assets in South Africa. I'm not good with technology. I can barely properly say digitalisation. So I was quite concerned, and I had to do a lot of research to figure out what can I say to you guys of value, because you probably know more than I do. My agenda is quite short. There's a problem statement of what's happening in the world today and what we face. Luckily, Christopher Milan has done a lot of my work already, because he talked to you a lot about some of the things in the solution steps. You've heard about a risk-based approach, additional information, which is pretty much enhanced due diligence, source of funds, ultimate beneficial owners, transaction monitoring, and there I'm going to tell you a hospital story, and screening requirements. But before we do that, and before it gets very boring, I did have a look to compare whether me as a member of society, as a customer of financial products myself, not just an employee of the FSCA, how does digitalisation affect me? What are the good old days now gone of just face-to-face engagement? Is everything now digitalised? So I had to do a bit of research and try to look for examples on traditional ways of scamming. And I came across a couple of interesting ones. I'm not going to bore you with all of them. But they said that you are more likely to become an identity theft statistic by having your wallet stolen than via online fraud. And I think sometimes we think with all the advancements, the crooks are just in the digital space. And clearly, traditional ways of scamming people and stealing from people are also still rife. What I want to highlight here that I found exceptionally interesting is it says that research found that our brains have an optimism bias. Simply put, it's the belief that we're less likely than our peers to experience something negative and more likely than our peers to experience something positive. And they call this an illusion of invulnerability. I love that because of where I work and what I see, and I also had to take it to heart personally. Who here has been scammed? Who here has scammed someone? Okay, I had to do that. I quickly want to make it personal, tell you about first how stupid I am with technology, and then how I got scammed, just because I'm human too. During the COVID pandemic, obviously, I contracted the virus and I got sick. And I got a phone call from my garden services saying, Mrs. Fourie, you haven't paid us yet for the month. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sick. I can't leave the house. I'll do what I can. And they said, no, don't worry. You know, you get better. But I felt very bad. I'm not the kind of person who want to owe people money. I'm a pain like that. The reason I didn't pay them was because I would usually go to an ATM, because I got tired of standing in a bank. But I would go to an ATM, withdraw money, and then put it back into the ATM and pay people that way. Yeah. But now I was owing people money. Okay? And now I didn't want to have a bad credit record. So in July 2021, I was 41 years old. I registered for online banking. Yeah. Brave new world, hey? But no, I'm not an avid online shopper, but yeah, a nice pair of shoes or something now and then. And it so happens, as the devil wanted, in August last year, I heard that Imagine Dragons was coming to South Africa. There would be a concert in February, and I wanted tickets because I was dead set on attending a concert for a change. I was working on this FATF thing. I'm tired. I went to Morocco. I'm tired of work and regulation. I want to party. Right. Lo and behold, I bought the tickets from a invalid ticket vendor platform. Yeah. So that was 3,500 gone. On the day of the concert, I found out that the tickets aren't valid. No concert, no money. Had a party at the house with a CD. But I'm saying this to you to try and just humanify, make human, because that's not a word, the things that we do face in a digitalized world. So COVID was bad, but there were benefits from it as well. One of the results is that we do live in a highly digitized, I told you I can't say this word, digitized financial environment. And there is still a COVID fallout. If you are an employer, you have at some point very recently sent all your staff on cybercrime resilience training. I know we have to do it at the FSCA. I hate it. I struggle with it. I struggle to understand these spoofing and spillings and all sorts of things that happen to people. But the reality is they do happen. And if this is the problem statement, if this is what we sit with and live with in the financial environment, the financial institution sector where you live and breathe and work every day, the question is then what can you do about it? And my first solution would be, eventually, to apply a risk-based approach. And it sounds easy to do, but it's not that easy to do. People that don't struggle with applying a risk-based approach, there's just two breeds. One, it's people who have really perfected the art of understanding their risk, and there's not that many of them. The other ones are the ones that still apply a rules-based approach. They don't struggle because they're still ticking boxes. Those who are struggling applying a risk-based approach are struggling because it requires discretion. It's subjective. My risk understanding is different to yours. My appetite is different to yours. But let's take a moment and have a look at this. It says a risk-based approach consists of the identification, assessment, and understanding of risk. And really understanding is, I think, the word understanding risk is one of the most misunderstood words, unfortunately. And here I'm limiting it to money laundering, terror financing, and proliferation financing risk. Forget about your profit risk or your other risks. You have to conduct, Christopher's also mentioned this, you have to conduct what is called a business risk assessment. What is that? Do you know that there's a national risk assessment? Just by show of hands, is this new to you? Okay, there's a national risk assessment. It was published in 2019. The TF-specific one was published in April last year. It's also on our website. And the new one has been developed and it's subject to IDC approval at the moment before publication. Did you know there is a sector risk assessment published by the FSCA? Please. I'm getting very worried. I'm going to have to work on my awareness raising. So the reason I'm referring to a national risk assessment and a sector risk assessment is when you do a business risk assessment, you have to look at threats and vulnerabilities and consequences. So what's a consequence? It's when a threat exploits vulnerability. And there should be touch points between the NRA and the SRA and your business risk assessment in terms of what these threats and vulnerabilities and consequences are. And what you learn from that is what you put in your RMCP, your risk management and compliance program. When you do this, you have to be very honest and critical with yourself. Last night I was practicing my speech and my husband came home and he said, "Why are you on the screen?" I said, "I'm critting myself, leave. I'm practicing." You have to crit yourself. You have to look granularly at what have you done previously in business risk assessments that worked. What failed? What can you do better? Because it will start with you and your understanding of risk. It's unique to you. A few tips and tricks. I've mentioned the NRA and the SRA. I would encourage you to be granular in your assessment of risk to really understand it. I just used the example of geographic risk here, but there are others. It's very easy when a supervisor comes to you and you say, "All my clients are low risk." Why? Because I only sell funeral policies. Okay. First thing that's wrong is you've only considered one risk factor. The other thing that you did is sometimes you struggle to articulate your rationale for your conclusion of a risk rating. You can't tell me someone is low risk because their kids are in your kids' school, you go to church with them, you gamble with them, you play golf with them. That's not knowing someone, a customer from an AML CFD perspective. So be granular. In terms of geographic risk, I've mentioned, if you say it's foreign, have you considered the prevalence of tax evasion or sanctions or conflict or whatever in that particular geographic area to inform why you would say it's high or low? Or do you just default, it's easy to say local is low and foreign is high? That leads us to, if you apply a risk-based approach, you will properly risk rate your customers, not just once. It will change, be adjusted. And that requires application of relevant and appropriate customer due diligence measures. Moving away from a rules-based approach, you're not supposed to ask your customers, all your customers, for just a copy of the ID of their driver's license or the same stuff. You're supposed to distinguish in terms of the risk. What are you asking which client and how do you verify that information and how often do you go test it? So in terms of enhanced due diligence, it's customer due diligence, you know that you have to identify and verify the identity of your client. And that's the good old KYC. Now, in terms of since 2017 amendments to the FIC Act, you have to do customer due diligence. For high-risk clients, it's enhanced. It means the frequency and the intensity is bigger. You have to answer or get satisfactory answers to at least the following questions. And I'm not saying just an answer, a satisfactory answer. Who's my customer? Is it Michele Fourie with ID? I've already told you how old I am. So-and-so, she works for Fisca and she earns 3 million rand a month. Yeah, it's your levies, thanks. You have to look at Michele Fourie from an AML CFD perspective. You have to think, my entire profile, my intention of entering into a business relationship with you as a specific financial institution to acquire a specific financial product. Why would I want to do that? What's the nature of and purpose of that relationship? When you do use sources to verify anything that a customer tells you or any information you obtain, it's not prescribed that you use original sources, but it's obviously probably the best. So if possible, do use, it's tips and tricks, to use an original source. Make sure that you're able to verify information that a customer gives you about themselves. So if I tell you things, I have 9 parrots and I've been divorced 5 times and I have a moonshine business in my garage over weekends, can you verify that? To what extent can you? Or do you just take my word? I've mentioned the risk management and compliance program. I would like to encourage you, following the General Laws Amendment Act that was signed off by the President on 22 December while you were on the beach, and published on 29 December, half of that government gazette you'll see is amendment to the FIC Act. There's a lot of amendments. There's amendments to definitions, insertions, and it applies because it requires you to review your RMCP. We are starting inspections now afresh in April. I'm not saying any of you will be inspected, I don't know. But if we do knock on your door, I can tell you now we're going to ask for 2 RMCPs. I'm going to ask you for the one you have now, and I'm going to ask you for the previous one. Because I want to see whether you are reviewing. I want to see what you're changing. I want to see, in terms of the FATF standards, whether your RMCP and business risk assessments are dynamic. If it's not, it's going to be a problem. So heads up, this is a nice behind the scenes that Christopher mentioned. Right. Third thing in solving this problem statement of digital world and CEO fraud and anonymity and obscuring beneficial owners, you got to find out where does the money come from that your client is using to pay for the product. And you have to, with comfort, know that the information they have is true and correct. And you have to know who ultimately benefits from the transaction. Again, Christopher has mentioned this, the definition for beneficial ownership has been amended in the FIC Act. It should be read with the amendments to Section 21B. And they're quite comprehensive. It does require you to go further now. If one of the trustees or the founder or a beneficiary is now a legal person or another legal arrangement, you have to find the natural person in that legal arrangement. So you have to go further. Please don't think that this is the end and all. I thought just from a practical perspective, you guys like us to tell you exactly what to do and what to look for. It's just examples. If you have a customer who has money for whatever purpose, for the payment of a premium or a lump sum investment or whatever the hell the client buying from you, there must be a way to prove where the money comes from. Especially if it's legal money. If it's illegal money, I can tell you now that there's also proof of where it comes from. It's just not going to be disclosed to you because it would be self-incriminatory. The client is not going to tell you that. But a payslip or a bank statement, a tax return can tell you with a lot of surety that the money was in fact from my salary or an inheritance or a loan. Yes, there are people who borrow money to invest. Did you know that? I'm sure you know that. You know that better than me. But you have to understand where this money comes from, what's the purpose of that money, and where it's ultimately going. An interesting thing, perhaps when I am interrupting myself, and I don't want to keep you from lunch, but I mentioned to a colleague in the room during the tea break, often we think when we are in the financial services industry, the money launderer or a terrorist financier will only come and buy with the bad money your good financial product and you have to detect it. Sometimes you have bad people who also earn legitimate money that they do use for terrorist financing, for example. And you could also have a client who's buying a very simple product maybe from you. And there's nothing wrong. It's maybe a low-risk type of product. Everything seems okay. And yet, despite the financial product not being a problem or raising any flags, that client might be a diamond smuggler or an abalone smuggler or a human trafficker or a drug trafficker, which would require you to report, although it's not necessarily in relation to the financial product that you offered. I'm going to skip this. It will be in the slides that Heidi will present. It's just some examples from Austrac on wealth, source of funds. It's very simple examples and self-explanatory. And the alert that I've told you about in terms of the amendments to the FIC Act, please go have a look at that beneficial owner one. So it's the definition that's been amended as well as 21B, and together with that, there are subsections inserted in terms of 21C and 21A that deal specifically also with Section 29 reporting. So please be on the same page. Second to last, this is where the hospital story comes in. I'll be quick. Who's been to hospital? Ever? Oh, there's a lot of sick people here, me included. Okay, so you know when you go to a hospital and you stand there for check-in, first thing they do is they ask you to pay. Okay, we'll figure out what you're paying for later, but you pay something. And then they ask you awkward things. How tall are you? How fat are you? What's your blood pressure? What's your blood type? What's your fever? They ask you everything and they write it down. There's a clipboard, there's a nurse or a doctor or someone, they write it down. And while you are in your hospital bed, they come frequently, some of the personnel, they check again your blood pressure, your heart rate, your fever, your whatever, to see if the medical intervention is working. Right. Why am I making this comparison to ongoing due diligence? If you do not gather comprehensive information about your customer when you onboard the customer, you won't have a baseline to compare anything to in future. If you don't go back to the customer to see if that information is still the same, if nothing changed, customer hasn't suddenly become a politically exposed person or whatever, again, there will be nothing for you to compare. And what you need to do is you need to compare. That's what ongoing due diligence is. You have to go check whether what you know is still correct. Why is this important? Okay, for patients, it's important because otherwise the doctor could be feeding you morphine when you're needing something else. In your space, it's important because, again, the risk changes. It's keeping your finger on the pulse, doing ongoing due diligence. What I would like to caution you against, I'm not going to go through the whole slide, is you know you have to do a risk-based approach. I'm brainwashing you with that. Every third word is risk-based approach. That means there's a difference in intensity and frequency. If you go to all your clients once a year, you're a good broker. You take TCF seriously. You go to them, you make sure they're happy. And then you somehow do the CDD once a year while you're there. I'm telling you it's wrong. Because if you have a high-risk client that you go to the same frequency once a year and a low-risk client, you're not applying a risk-based approach. We see this a lot. Maybe all your clients, I know a lot of your clients are apparently low risk. I'm just saying, be mindful when you apply what should be a risk-based approach, especially as it applies to CDD. Transaction monitoring, it's very prevalent in large banks and organizations where they have these systems with rules built into it and flags. You should do transaction monitoring regardless of the size and complexity and nature of your business. Yes, yours might be manual and not automated, and that's fine. But you have to figure out whether the patterns of transactions is in line with the profile of the customer. I think it was Chris McAdam who said at one stage, we are very cautious as humankind to red flags. But not everything in life is that black and white. Somewhere there might be an orange flag that's in the process of becoming red and you're missing it because you're only looking for the white flags and the red flags. Important, have a plan. Do transaction monitoring. You do it as part of your ongoing due diligence as well. Last but not least, and I'm really nearly finished, in solving the issues of digitalization and how it's abused, despite all its advances and convenience, you have to do screening. We published on the 6th of March a YouTube webinar. We collaborated with the FIC specifically on amendments to the FIC Act and guidance issued by the FIC on the guidance products I'm going to refer to here. Please go have a look at that so that the requirements as it relates to targeted financial screening and the like, there's another opportunity for you to learn more about that. There's certain screening requirements that you have to do it. You have to screen against targeted financial sanctions lists. Some of you do it automatically, or manually. Some of you use tools and service providers, how you do it, what works for you. It's not my business as long as it works for you and you do it. There's some of those tools where Atlas Media and PEP screening and the like is also included in the service provided. The more information you get about your clients, the better, of course. I just want to highlight, okay, this is not working, but I have it in my head. I want to highlight to you just a couple of guidance products. There is a draft guidance now 6 of 2022, published by the FIC together with draft PCC 116. It deals with screening of your employees. Yeah, you have to screen them, you actually have to risk rate them. If you're not aware of that, it was published for public consultation. Go to their website and have a look. We've also dealt with it, as I said, in the webinar that we recorded. There are other public compliance communications, I think in particular 51, 53 and 54, that deals with proliferation, financing, terrorism financing, and PEPs. Yes, they must still be aligned to the amendments in the FIC Act, but the principles in there is still very much useful. You want to know where you find a PEP list, can't build one yourself. There's actually links in there that you can go click on and do screening like that. The reason I'm just making reference to these guidance products is legislation can be tough. I know not everyone is a lawyer, and even if you understand the regulatory requirements, you might still find it difficult to sit still and figure out, but where do I start? How do I start to figure out my inherent risks? I don't know what my threats are. I don't know what a vulnerability is. Go to these guidance products. They usually go a long way in bridging the gap between what is required in terms of the law and how you can consider doing it in real life, in practice. And with that, I will hand back to Heidi. I will stay behind in the foyer, not because I think I'm important, but if you do have questions and you had your lekker lunch, I'm happy to stay behind and take any questions you might have. Thank you for indulging me. Well.